Hey folks, so in this video, I just wanted to cover some news that we're going to see this upcoming week, as well as earnings. And to finally end us off, I do want to cover technical analysis. So if we're looking on Tuesday, we're going to get some housing data. This is the United States new home sales. Now, here's this chart that we want to pay attention to. So as we can see here in January of 2022, we saw 831,000 new home sales. And then since then, this number has just been dwindling. Now here in July, we had 532,000. So, it was pretty low compared to all the way back here in January. And then in August, this number just jumped. So, we're going to get September's data and we'll see, is this going to decline or is it going to increase from here? Now on Wednesday, we're going to get the pending home sales. Now, I've covered pending home sales before, and basically, we're looking at an index number. So if this number is 100, it's basically saying that that is the base year from 2001 when this index was created. So we're using 2001's pending home sales data as our index of 100. So if we are below 100, that means that we have less pending home sales than in 2001. So as you guys can see here in August of 2021, this was over 100. It was 116. So, we had quite a bit of pending home sales. Now, all the way here, starting in April, pending home sales was going under 100. So you have to think about when these rate hikes really started. So it does make quite a bit of sense. So we're going to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months of the pending home sales index going under 100. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Hopefully, we do get back above 100, but just given the outlook and just given what the 30-year fixed mortgage is at, it's very likely that, this pending home sales index number is going to continue to drop. Now, I've talked about GDP before here, and essentially what we're going to get is the Q3 preliminary GDP. So here's what happens. Essentially, we get these two preliminary prints, and then we get the final print for the quarter. So back here in, let's see, so back here in April, we got the Q1 preliminary print. That came in negative. So, that definitely caused some worry. It was the first negative print in basically a while, basically since COVID. So, we got these final print for Q1 GDP at negative 1.6%. And then in July, we got the preliminary print for Q2 GDP. That came in negative as well. That was at negative 0.9%. And then the final print for that was negative 0.6%. Now, here for Q3 preliminary GDP, we are forecasting 2.1%. Obviously this number could be off. So it would be a welcoming sight if this number was positive, because that would essentially break that 2-quarter cycle. So, a lot of people say 2 quarters of negative GDP, that's a recession. And then you got the Biden administration saying something totally different. So, we're not going to talk politics here, but basically, whatever you want to call it, 2 quarters of GDP that are negative is definitely not a good sign. So definitely pay attention to that number when it does come out. Now, on Friday, we're going to get the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Report. Now, you can see all the way here in July, this number was pretty low. Now, you have to remember that gas prices were freaking high as hell. So gas prices definitely weigh in on consumer sentiment, and it got much, much better here. So we went from a low of around 50 to where we are most recently, right around 60. So that's basically because gas prices fell down a little bit, So this actually leads me to my next point, where I want to talk about the EIA short-term energy outlook. Now, this information comes from the United States Energy Information Administration, And essentially, they give us a outlook of where oil prices could be and what gasoline prices are likely going to look like. So right here, they're saying that the Brent crude oil spot price in our forecast averages $93 per barrel in the fourth quarter of 2022 and 95 in 2023. So now let's just take a quick look at Brent right here. So if we're looking at Brent, it's right around 91.34. So we're not too far off from that 93 spot price. Now, this does take into consideration the OPEC Plus announcement of their production cuts. So this information is pretty darn new. It basically came out, I believe, something like 2 weeks ago. So I'm a little bit late to report that, so I do apologize for that. Now, here's the thing that we all want to know. So what are US retail gasoline prices going to be? Well, here they're forecasting the national average to be about 380 per gallon in Q4 of 2022 and 357 per gallon in 2023. So that basically covers most of the news. Now let's just go ahead and look at the earnings calendar. Now, this is what I like about investing.com. I could go over to the earnings tab, and then I could see a pretty wide selection of all the earnings that are going to happen that is organized by market cap. So highest market cap goes first. Now, if we're looking at the more notable earnings, let's go to Tuesday. So Tuesday, October 25th, we get Google, we get Visa, we get Coca-Cola. Now, go down a little bit more. Let's see, for Wednesday, we're going to get Microsoft, Meta, Bristol Myers, ADP, Boeing. Now let's go down a little bit more. Let's look at Thursday. Now for Thursday, we're going to get Apple, Amazon, MasterCard, McDonald's, Comcast, Honeywell, Intel, Caterpillar. So Thursday is definitely going to be a pretty big day, especially, when you got these two companies that are trillion-dollar mega caps. Let's see what we got for Friday. Friday, oh, this is a definitely an oil earnings play. So we got ExxonMobil, Chevron, and we got AbbVie. And yeah, those are the three really big ones right there. So now that we're done with earnings and we're done with the news, let's go ahead. Let's jump into the technicals. Definitely some interesting stuff that I saw. Now, first one, I want to look at Apple. Now, let's just zoom in here a little bit. So actually, before I zoom in, I do want to point out this trend line right here. So notice that we had this strong bounce right here, strong bounce right there. And then once we broke past that, we had this massive, massive rally. So also realize that right here, we momentarily broke underneath that. And that is when we had that massive, massive green candle day. So now let's go ahead. Let's zoom into this price action right here. So I do want to note that we've been in this downtrend channel for a bit. So this downtrend channel basically started, let's see, in August. So we hit this peak right here, down, up, up, down. And then we broke underneath this key trend line. And intraday, we had this massive, huge rally. And then right here, we broke out of the top of this channel. We back tested it, we bounced. So technical wise, on the technicals, this looks pretty darn bullish. I do want to say that. But on the earnings front, that could be an entirely different scenario. This thing could easily reverse, but just saying, technicals look good. Now, let's go ahead. Let's look at the next one. Let's look at Google. So if we're looking at Google, we have this pandemic trendline pivot. So this is when we had that crash, broke underneath and then rallied, ripped right up above here. And then we go all the way over here and we back test this trend line, we bounce, and then now we're kind of messing with this trend line again. We bounced off it very recently as well. We also have this top trend line right here. It catches the high right there, and then it catches the high of this move right there. So basically, when we broke out of this trend line, this was a false breakout, and then you can see that when we broke back below it, very sharp sell-off. So let's just go ahead and zoom in, see if we could see a little bit more here. So as you guys can see, bounce off of this trend line, and then we just more recently just broke out of this top trend line again. You can see broke out, rejected right there, back tested. So now we're back into the supply zone right here. So, we'll see what happens with earnings, but, obviously earnings could take us far above this trend line or far below this trend line right here. So this is the one trend line that we don't want to break. So let's just zoom out so you guys can see. We don't want to break this trend line right here. So obviously if we break that, there's a pretty steep sell-off in store for us. Also note that we did fill this gap right here. So this is why price action is consolidating right around here, because we went back and we filled this gap. Now let's take a look at SPY. So SPY, there is one very key trend line that I do want to pay attention to. It's this pandemic pivot trend line. You guys can see right here, massive bounce off of it. Right here, massive bounce off of it. When we broke underneath it, massive sell. We bounced back to this, we rejected, and now it looks like we want to approach it again. So let's go ahead, let's zoom into this price action so you guys can see exactly what I'm talking about. So this is that pandemic trendline pivot. Notice we rejected hard right off here. And then you can see that more recently, we've been in this downtrend channel. So very similar to Apple, we had this moment where we had this serious bull trap right there. Now that is one hell of a serious bull trap, because look at the day after, serious sell-off. So now, we have this downtrend channel. We broke out, kind of a fake out right there. And then we back tested the top of this trend line, and then we bounced off hard. So that was essentially what happened on Friday. So now the worry here is, hey, you know what? If we go up a little bit more, we hit this pandemic trend line again. So are we going to reject a second time right here? Or are we just going to break out massively above this? So that's definitely the big question right there. So if we're just looking at this week, well, essentially, this is going to be something around 382. So right around 382 for SPY, you got to get a little bit cautious. Now, obviously, if we are going to break past this trend line, I think it's going to end up as a pretty big gap up in the pre-market. So that's just kind of usually what happens when we do see these massive trend lines getting broken, either to the downside or to the upside. Usually what happens is that we have these gaps so that people cannot react to it. So obviously, if I saw price action intraday reaching this trend line, people would short. But let's just say we just gap up in the pre-market and then we totally just gap right above this line. Well, then what usually happens is that people don't have time to react. So people can't just short it right there. So at times like that, when we do just have this massive gap up in the pre-market, sometimes, if we were to just go right up to here, sometimes we might see a back test and see some partial, see that gap just get partially filled and then rebound. So that could essentially happen if earnings does end up good. So now let's go ahead, look at the next ticker. I want to pay attention to XLF, which is the financial sector. Now, notice this yellow box. We've kind of been in this chop zone for a little bit. Had this massive rally right here, rejected off the top of this trend line. And then you can see kind of that we rejected again here. So now we're kind of just in this mid zone right here. So I do want to zoom in a little bit. Let's look at a shorter time frame. And let's move this over right here. So here's what I want to pay attention to. So right here, you can see that we had this gap. So we had this massive gap right here. And then right here on Friday, we essentially filled that gap. So this gap right here, that got filled. And then from that gap, we had this massive, massive rally. So definitely a reversal right here once we filled that gap. So that is the one thing that I do want to pay attention to. Now let's just go back to the higher time frame. So resistance is definitely going to show itself right around 32.63. And you guys can just see that it was prior support right here, prior support right there, resistance right there, and then once we broke underneath that level, serious sell-off, resistance more recently right here as well. So that 32, or actually let's see, the actual price is 32.59 is what we're looking at. So that is where we could see resistance on the financials. Oh boy, so Tesla. So the one key trend line with Tesla that you want to pay attention to is this one right here. So you guys can see if we're going all the way back here, it was acting as resistance, and then massive, massive run up, support, and then we broke underneath that more recently. So right here we broke underneath. We tried back testing it, didn't even get that high, and then sold off a little bit more. So we do have this very key support line, and this is pretty much right around, let's just zoom in here. So if we zoom in here, that trend line is right around 205. So yeah, right around 205 is where we see the support trend line. So if we do start breaking underneath that, it could be a pretty significant sell-off. Now, if essentially the entire market decides to rally, it's very, there's a very potential chance that we just go back and we retest this trend line. So that would look something along the lines of 240 on Tesla. So that's very possible that we could just draw out a double bottom right here and then rip up higher. So do keep that in mind. Don't be too short on Tesla. So let's actually just zoom out again. So to the downside, you'll definitely see right around this 180 level is definitely potential downside if the earnings season comes out pretty bad. Now, let's go ahead, take a look at Microsoft. So the one key trend line I want to pay attention to with Microsoft is this trend line right here. So you guys can see basically cut underneath that, bounced heavily off of it, came back tested it all the way back here. And then once we broke underneath that trend line, serious sell-off, massive rally, rejected. And then, we got into this demand zone right here. We got picked up. We actually cut underneath that demand zone a little bit, but we got picked up anyways. And then we actually rebounded off of this down trend line right here. So let's just go ahead and zoom into this actual price action so you guys can see exactly what it is I'm talking about. So take a look at this top trend line. Catches this price action right here, catches that gap right there. You can see that once we broke out, serious breakout, but this was essentially just a false breakout. So you guys can see broke out right there, rejected right there, cut underneath that trend line, more sell-off, some gappy price action right there, right into this supply zone, sold off even more, entered this demand zone, and then we actually broke out of this downtrend line. So, we even back tested it too. So where could price action go? Well, I would think that the most immediate area of resistance is going to be this trend line again. So definitely watch out if price action gets to around 253-ish. So that is kind of where I think that, it definitely gets a little bit more risky. But like I said, with SPY, we could just see a massive gap up just to get right back above this trend line. And then this could act as future support. So I think it's definitely wise to just wait a little bit, see how earnings season plays out. Now, if we do see some sort of massive rally, it's very possible that we just go back and back test this. Now, that will be when you would want to get in, not when right here when there's all sorts of uncertainty. Now, lastly, I want to look at the VIX. So essentially with the VIX, we have this trend line right here. We have this former resistance trend line that could now act as support. We also have a falling wedge. So let's just go ahead. Let's zoom into the price action so you guys can see what it is I'm talking about. So right here, you guys can see resistance, trend line, resistance, resistance, resistance. Right here, take a look at that candle. So the body of that candle, basically we had this massive run up. We actually cut below this trend line again, but we had a massive run up back above that. And more recently, we have this falling wedge right here that's actually leading us back to the support trend line right here. So that begs the question, we essentially have all of these converging points right here. We have this support line, we have this support line, we have this falling wedge. Now, if earnings comes in and it's not as bad as we think it's going to be, then it's very, very possible that the VIX can just cut right below all of these support lines. Now that is going to be a very, very, very bullish run for the S&P 500. Now here's the risky side. We have this massive falling wedge. We hit this trend line or this intersection, and that's going to happen right around 2870-ish, so like 2876 on the VIX. And then we see a massive run up from there. That could lead to a pretty serious sell-off. So, long story short, watch the VIX. Also, keep an eye on earnings. Hopefully, I have some time to cover some of the earnings that do come out. I definitely want to cover Microsoft because they give so much good guidance. So if you do want to get a preview of what we can expect on Microsoft, I do have a video on that and I'll link it down below so you guys can watch that. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and have a great one.